This is the most cursed sword in the world. And the reason why? Well, let me tell you. In a forgotten corner of the world, Elias Trent unearthed an ancient sword. Its blade was etched with a chilling warning. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. What started as a simple act of clearing his grandfather's land turned into a nightmare when Elias found himself hunted by relentless, monstrous foes. Bound by a legacy older than time, he must now rise beyond mortal limits to protect those he loves from the darkness that's coming for them. But wielding the power and burden of a fallen hero comes at a price. Because when humanity inherits a warrior's enemies, survival demands more than just courage. It demands the unbreakable spirit of a legend. Are you ready to meet Elias on his journey to become the legend? Because this is just the beginning. The rain had been falling all night, the kind that doesn't hammer but whispers, soft, persistent, and bone-deep cold. Elias Trent wasn't looking for anything. He wasn't a treasure hunter, an archaeologist, or an adventurer. He was just a man clearing his late grandfather's land, trying to decide whether to sell it or let it rot the way it had for decades. The woods behind the farmhouse were thick, old and stubborn. Fallen logs crumbled into rich black soil, and the air smelled of moss and wet leaves. His boots sank into the muck as he followed the rusted skeleton of a fence line. Somewhere in the overgrown tangle, his grandfather had buried things. Scraps of old tools, broken bottles, junk he thought might be useful someday. Elias had brought a shovel. He didn't expect to hear the clang. He froze. That wasn't rock. It wasn't wood. It was sharp and metallic, the kind of sound that echoes in your chest more than in your ears. He knelt, scraping mud away with his gloved hands, and saw a hint of steel. But it wasn't rusted orange like old iron. It was different. The rain slid down his neck as he dug faster, uncovering more of it. A sword. Not a replica, not a ceremonial prop. An actual sword, longer than his arm, its hilt wrapped in something that looked like ancient leather, cracked but still intact. The blade itself was impossibly clean, as though the centuries hadn't touched it. His breath came out in white clouds as he lifted it. The weight was perfect, balanced, solid, but there was something else. The moment his fingers closed around the grip, his ears filled with a low hum, almost like a note on a violin played just beneath hearing. The hair on his arms stood on end. When he tilted the sword toward the gray daylight, words glimmered faintly along the flat of the blade. At first, they looked like scratches or water stains, but then the rain ran down in rivulets, and he could read them clearly. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. Elias didn't move, didn't breathe. The words weren't carved. They shifted, as though written in light itself. Then the woods changed. It wasn't loud, not at first, just the absence of normal sound. No birds, no wind. The rain still fell, but each drop seemed heavier, slower, like the world was holding its breath. He had the sudden, bone-deep sensation that he was being watched. And not from one direction, from everywhere. The sword seemed to warm in his grip, and without knowing why, Elias realized something was listening, and something else was coming. The trees had faces. Elias saw them when the shadows stretched and the light failed. The gnarled trunks twisted into snarling mouths, revealing rows and rows of teeth. Roots became grasping fingers, and the forest floor turned into a carpet of watchful eyes peering up at him. Panic tightened his throat. He wanted to scream, to thrash about, to run, but he couldn't. Fear froze him in place, staring down the length of the sword. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, the forest surged forward, becoming a writhing, roaring beast of claws and fangs and gnashing teeth. He stumbled back, tripped over a gnarled root, and landed hard on his back. The sword flew from his numb fingers and clanged against the rocks, the sound echoing unnaturally in the suddenly silent woods. The beast was upon him then, a whirlwind of snapping branches and tearing leaves, and he could do nothing but protect his head and wait for the end. When the sun rose again, painting the sky with streaks of rose and gold, the forest was silent. The mangled remains of the fence lay scattered around him like broken bones. And propped against a tree as though someone had forgotten it there was the sword, gleaming in the morning light. Its blade seemed to pulse with power, and as Elias stared at it, the words on its surface swam into focus. This time, instead of reading them, he felt them in his bones, in his muscles, in every inch of his suddenly tingling skin. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. The forest held its breath. A single bead of sweat trickled down Elias's temple. His eyes met the unwavering gaze of a squirrel staring down at him from a nearby branch. It chittered once, a harsh, discordant sound, and vanished into the undergrowth. Elias scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt and leaves from his clothes. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he couldn't stay here. He had to get away from this place, from the woods, from the sword. He started running, stumbling over roots and fallen logs, not daring to look back. Behind him, the forest sighed, a long, low sound like the settling of some ancient, terrible beast. And somewhere deep within its heart, Elias could have sworn he heard a single, mocking laugh. Elias, clutching the hilt, pulled the massive claymore closer, its weight settling reassuringly on his arm. Rain lashed down, driven by a wind that tore at his cloak and matted his hair to his forehead. But through the driving rain and wind, he saw them. They came pouring out of the trees, dozens of them, tall and gaunt, faces hidden under ragged hoods. Their eyes, though, burned bright, feral things that glinted in the gloom like chips of obsidian. As they surged forward, Elias stepped back, his foot catching on a gnarled root. He stumbled, sprawling on the slick mud. The heavy sword slipped from his numb fingers, clattering away across the slick stones. The world tilted. Panic clawed at his throat. Losing the sword would mean losing everything. But as he scrambled after it, something slammed into him, knocking him off balance. A hand, impossibly strong, clamped over his mouth, stifling his cry. Cold dread coiled in his gut. Whatever this thing was, it meant him harm. With a Herculean effort, Elias rolled away, scrambling back to his feet. He whirled, bringing the staff up in a desperate defensive stance. But whatever had attacked him was gone. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the stones, muffling sound. In the distance, he heard a sound that made his blood turn to ice, the scrape of claws on stone. That was no animal. Scrambling back to his sword, he pulled it free of the mud, its weight a comfort in his hand. As he turned back to face the forest, he saw movement in the trees. Tall, gaunt figures were emerging, their eyes burning bright, their faces hidden under ragged hoods. They flowed out of the trees like a tide, their whispers blending into an unnerving drone. Elias stood there, sword raised, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. Whatever was out there, it had found him. And then from the depths of the wood came a voice, heavy with mockery. "Brave warrior, come to slay a few rats? How very noble." The speaker stepped out from the shadows, tall and lean, his features obscured by the hood of his dark cloak. But when he raised his face, Elias gasped. He recognized that cruel twist of mouth, those mocking gray eyes. It was the same face from the painting, the one that had haunted his nightmares. "You," Elias breathed, his grip tightening on the sword. "You are the fallen warrior." The figure laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "So the rumors are true. The last of the Dragon Guard still lives." He gestured to the horde of creatures behind him, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. "And you are not alone." Elias swallowed, his gaze darting between the newcomers and the forest behind them. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The fallen warrior inclined his head, and Elias saw a flash of something like amusement in his eyes. "You have something that belongs to me, Elias Dragonheart," the fallen warrior said, his voice like gravel on stone. "The artifact? Give it to me, and perhaps I will show you mercy." Elias knew exactly what he meant. The pendant hidden beneath his cloak, the one he'd taken from the fallen knight. He'd hoped to use it to resurrect the dragons, unaware that it was being hunted by forces beyond his ken. Now, he understood. The Dragon Guard hadn't been slain in battle. They'd been betrayed. The thought of handing over the pendant, of giving his enemy what he wanted, filled Elias with a cold fury. "Never!" he whispered, clutching the sword tighter. He could feel the vibrations of the earth as the horde shifted, a low growl rising from their throats. The fallen warrior snarled, and in a flash, he was on Elias, sword flashing. From the moment he touched the mysterious blade, Elias had felt a profound disconnection. It was like trying to remember a dream. Something important, momentous, but just out of reach. That feeling had only grown since. It was as if the forest itself recoiled from him, the very trees and stones whispering warnings in some language he couldn't understand. But now, standing here, the whispers seemed to solidify into words. He just didn't know which language they were speaking. Was it Latin? Old Norse? Or something older, something more primeval? He remembered the old stories his grandfather used to tell him about the ancient people who lived in these lands before the cataclysm, before the world ended and began again. Stories of heroes who wielded magic weapons and fought creatures from beyond the stars. Back then, he thought they were just fairy tales. Now, he wasn't so sure. The rain was almost over now, but the sky remained heavy, the air thick and charged. The forest felt different, somehow darker and more oppressive. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elias tightened his grip on the sword hilt. He could feel its power thrumming beneath his fingers, a dark and dangerous energy that both terrified and exhilarated him. Suddenly, a twig snapped close by. He whirled around, his heart pounding, and saw a small gray rabbit, its nose twitching. It stared at him for a moment, then hopped away. A rabbit. Of course, it was just a rabbit. But the sudden movement, the nearness of it, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. For a moment, he felt like a wild animal himself, all senses alert, ready to flee or fight. But there was nowhere to go. This clearing was a prison. He started walking toward the barn again, each step echoing in the stillness. As he neared the building, the whispering grew louder, taking on a new urgency. Elias stopped, listening intently. Could it be? Were the voices trying to tell him something, warn him of something? What did they know that he didn't? Then he heard it. A faint sound at first, like the rustle of leaves, but gradually growing louder. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps approaching. Whatever was out there, it was big. Elias felt a surge of panic. He didn't want to face whatever this was, but he had no choice. He drew the sword, its cold steel biting into his palm. A dark shape emerged from the trees, blocking the path to the barn. It was humanoid in form, but distorted, twisted as if in some terrible pain. Its skin was a sickly green, stretched taut over sharp angles and protrusions. And those eyes, they burned with an alien fire. Fear threatened to paralyze Elias, but he forced himself to stand his ground. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the clearing. The creature tilted its head, regarding him with cold, reptilian eyes. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. Its voice was a harsh rasp, like stones grinding together. "Why have you come here?" "I don't know," Elias said honestly. He didn't realize how close he was to the creature until he saw the whites of its eyes, saw the bared fangs in its sneering mouth. He stumbled back, knocking over a nearby lantern. It fell, spilling its light, and its life, into the darkness. A hiss of pain, a guttural curse, and then silence. When Elias dared to move to look again, the creature was gone. He found the lantern later, smashed, and empty. And that's when he noticed the mark carved into it, a strange symbol that seemed to writhe and pulse like a living thing. It was the same symbol he had seen on the creatures outside the village, the ones his grandfather had called the grotesques. So they hadn't forgotten. They had been waiting, and now he knew why. These creatures weren't mindless monsters. They were patient, intelligent, and they remembered everything. Most of all, they remembered the pain they had suffered at the hands of the fallen warrior. And now they had found Elias, the man who had taken the warrior's blade, his legacy. He had walked into a trap, and now the game was on. Their game. Elias knew he couldn't stay here. He needed to get out of the forest, find somewhere safe. But where? And what would he do then? He had no answers. Only questions that echoed in the vast emptiness of his ignorance. It's the day after the battle at the stream, and Elias is awake, well-rested, ready for another day of fighting the undead hordes. But no, seriously, it's been days since he last slept. The battle was yesterday, and even though he killed quite a few of those weird skeleton dudes, he doesn't feel much rested. So he's headed back into the woods today. Not because he has to, but because he wants to find more clues about this sword and what it told him about himself. He finds a chest half buried under the roots of an ancient oak, smashes it open, and finds some really old and mysterious gear inside. First, a pair of gauntlets. The sword tells him they're called gauntlets of Kareth, which apparently means they can turn aside any blow not born of will. Sounds good. He also finds a metal disc that looks like a dinner plate and is covered in runes. The sword tells him that's a shield, except it's not from this world. Apparently, it'll open only to his intent. So he tries concentrating really hard while holding it and gets a nice blue shimmering doohickey that looks kind of like a door. Then there's a small pouch that contains a bunch of glowing stones. The sword says they burn whatever they touch, even things that don't normally burn like a corpse, for instance. Meanwhile, back at the farm, some survivors are having second breakfast. They finished off all the fresh bread last night, so Mrs. Hawthorne is baking some more. Mr. Hawthorne is sharpening his axe. One of the kids is trying to milk a goat. That kid is getting stabbed in the face repeatedly. It's going well. Suddenly, someone screams. Not a human scream, but a weird, animalistic one. Mrs. Hawthorne nearly drops her pie. Old man Jenkins grabs his crossbow. Everyone looks around nervously. Elias hears the scream too and runs toward it. He finds a clearing where 8 of the green-eyed hunters are surrounding something. Those are the same people who attacked him at the stream, except these guys are wearing armor made of bone and hide. Whatever they're surrounding is pretty big, like 8 feet tall with a giant jaw that splits in two. It's kind of like one of those skeleton warriors from the Warcraft movies. Elias hides behind a tree and watches as one of the hunters charges forward. The big guy just stands there and slices the hunter in half with a giant bone-edged blade. Another hunter flanks around behind and tries to stab the monster in the back. The big guy just turns around and crushes that dude's skull like a grape. At this point, Elias decides he should probably do something. He steps out from behind the tree, Gauntlet catches a swipe from one of the giant blades and shield flares to life in his other hand. He burns one of the little skeletons with a glowing rock, and the big guy takes notice. Finally, they're gonna fight. This is why he came out here. Now the big guy charges, stomping the ground and cracking the earth. But Elias is ready. He parries a couple of attacks, then spins and kicks another skeleton in the face. The sword's humming louder now. Elias is starting to get amped. This is what he was born to do. He fights like he was trained, using every trick he learned from every master. He dances around the warlord, turning the tide of battle with every spin and kick and slash. He uses the environment to his advantage, hiding behind trees and rocks, darting out to strike, then disappearing again. The warlord is enraged. It lashes out wildly, trying to catch him, but Elias is too quick. And finally, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, he lands a killing blow. As the sword cuts through the rotten flesh, the warlord shrieks in rage and agony. Its eyes dim and it collapses, crumbling into dust. Elias stands panting, surrounded by the bones of the dead. His clothes are torn. His skin is scratched and bloody, but he's alive. The sword glows brighter than ever, vibrating with power. In its mind, the battle is over, but Elias knows better. He wipes the sweat and blood out of his eyes and looks out at the endless forest, a small smile creeping onto his face. The war is just beginning. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. A dense forest draped in fog at the break of dawn. Rain drips from moss-covered branches onto the damp ground below. And here we find our hero, Elias, mid-30s, ruggedly handsome, fresh stubble, dark rain jacket over a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal toned forearms and hands caked in mud. His sturdy, well-worn mud boots sink slightly into the soft earth. He kneels beside a freshly turned-over mound of dirt, a silver shovel resting beside him. His eyes are fixed on a faint metallic glint buried beneath the wet soil. With quiet determination, he brushes away the clinging mud, revealing the worn leather grip of an ancient sword hilt. Fingers tense, he grips the handle, yanks, and the sword slides free of the encasing dirt. Adrenaline surges through him as he lifts the heavy weapon into the weak gray daylight. Water streams down its length, momentarily obscuring the faint glowing runes etched along the blade. As the droplets evaporate, the glowing characters become visible once more. Elias reads them aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the unnatural stillness of the forest. All enemies of the fallen warrior are now your enemies. Behind him, the trees seem to stir, the branches shifting as if countless pairs of eyes are watching his every move. A low growl rumbles in the distance. Startled, Elias whirls around to face the sound, just as a tall, hunched shape steps out of the mist. Its skin is a patchwork of rough stone and moss, its face obscured by a thick helmet of bark and leaves. Two glowing green eyes pierce through the gloom, fixing their intense gaze upon him. More shapes emerge from the mist, each one identical to the last, all bearing those same unsettling green eyes. They spread out in a loose circle, their claws dragging furrows in the already muddy soil. Their leader takes a menacing step forward, its bone blades jutting from under moss-covered forearms. It lets out a harsh hiss, bearing a row of sharp fangs. Then, with astonishing speed, it lunges. In a fluid motion, Elias swings the sword. Sparks and black ichor spray as the blade severs the creature's forearm mid-leap. A strangled screech cuts off abruptly as the severed limb hits the ground and the remaining creatures recoil in unison. The sword pulses with warm golden light, bathing Elias in its glow. The creatures chatter amongst themselves, their voices a cacophony of hissing and clicking. One of them gestures frantically toward the dense trees behind Elias, and after a moment's hesitation, the whole group melts back into the mist, vanishing one by one until the forest is silent once more. The rain begins to fall harder, drumming on the forest floor, and the sound of rushing water echoes nearby. The camera pans up to reveal Elias standing motionless, his eyes fixed on the spot where the creatures disappeared. He takes a shuddering breath and sheathes the sword, then begins digging with renewed vigor. Moments later, his shovel strikes something hard. With dirt flying, he unearths a large blackened wooden chest, its iron lock smashed and distorted. Inside, nestled on a bed of charred cloth, are a pair of gauntlets, a smaller rune-etched disc, and a pouch containing several small stones that faintly pulse with golden light. He pulls on the gauntlets. The metal plates slide and lock into place around his wrists. With a slight wave of his hand, he activates the blue energy shield emanating from the disc. Then, clutching the pouch close, Elias turns and runs. As the camera follows, we see that the lush forest has vanished, replaced by a desolate, war-torn plain under a blood-red sky. Broken banners and shattered armor litter the ground, testament to battles fought and lost. And in the center of it all stands a towering warrior in battered black armor, his helm scarred and dented, his face hidden in its shadow. He holds the same sword aloft, its runes glowing brightly. At his command, an endless army of monstrous beings pour out of the mist. There are the green-eyed hunters, the winged fiends with razor-sharp talons, and the hulking brutes with jagged bone blades. But they aren't alone. An elite force of warriors clad in shining silver armor stands shoulder to shoulder, their swords and shields at the ready. A massive gate looms in the distance, guarded by two colossal stone golems. All three armies press forward, stretching endlessly across the plain. Suddenly, the vision vanishes. The camera shakes violently as it falls from above. When it lands, we see that Elias is back in his muddy farmhouse yard. The ruined chest lies abandoned on the ground beside him. Rain drips from the eaves of the old barn, and in the distance, thunder rumbles ominously. But Elias is no longer the same. His eyes blaze with golden fire. As he clutches the sword tightly, the glowing words echoing in his mind, he steps forward, determined to face whatever challenges lie ahead.